So what I would like to share with you today is how a courageous approach to goal setting can actually develop your organization towards business agility. And for those of you who are just embarking on their OKR journey, maybe you find a couple ideas in there on how to get started. For those of you who are already amidst their journey, maybe there are a couple twists and tweaks in here to improve that even further. Let's start. The idea behind OKRs, as many of you know, is rather simple. So then it is no wonder that many companies today are using OKRs as one of their building blocks in their agile transformation, hoping to achieve even faster and greater success by using them. That was also the situation Peter found himself into as a CTO of an IT service unit I met a couple of years ago. He was responsible for a service unit managing 500 employees, and their goal was to transform that unit into a fully agile product organization. When I met them, they had just made their first steps into their transformation, were still highly motivated to continue. Very little did he know of the bumpy journey ahead when he decided that OKRs should be one building block of his transformational journey. So he started off by sharing his enthusiasm for OKRs and the simple idea behind it, that OKRs bridge the gap between the long-term goals and the daily execution in the teams. By formulating an inspiring description of the next step towards that vision in an objective, and combining that with measurable key results that look at the objective from different perspectives and that measure a change in a relative or absolute value to tell you whether you are on the right track towards achieving that objective or not. And once you've set out the defined OKRs, you embark on an iterative journey similar to other agile frameworks with regular OKR check-ins to track progress and OKR reflections at the end of the cycle to learn and adjust. So far, so good with the simple idea. So the decision was made to use OKRs, the first pilot teams were found, and the motivational journey began. 2 iterations into the circle, though, Peter got some feedback that was not as he expected it to be. People didn't really see the benefit of using OKRs. They were complaining it has taken up way too much time and nothing has really changed in the organization. Maybe some of you have already heard feedback like that in your transformation as well. So Peter was asking himself, what is going on here? His experience at his last employer was very positive and he saw all the benefits, but yet he wanted to question, maybe OKRs are actually overrated in their role in business transformation, or what is actually needed to make them a successful building block. So he started out on a quest to find answers to these questions. And what I want to share with you today are some of the common pitfalls that he described afterwards towards mastering OKRs as part of their transformation, some of the courageous decisions and good practices he established along the way, and why today they are using OKRs as a catalyst for organizational development. And if you would ask him today, he would tell you that he doesn't think that OKRs are overrated, but actually underestimated in both their complexity and their potential to develop your organization towards business agility. Because goals live at the center of everything you do and should be the heart of your transformation. So who am I to tell this story? As Martin just introduced myself, I'm a coach and trainer based in Munich. And over the last years, I supported many companies on their way towards focus, autonomy, and value creation, mostly by implementing OKRs, educating OKR coaches, and also supporting companies on improving their current OKR approach together with leadership and agile HR principles. So looking back at Peter and his current situation. To get answers, he talked to many pilot teams, to experts in the field, and also to some of his former colleagues at the employer, where he made all the great experiences around OKRs. And one thing that became very obvious at the beginning was that nobody actually really knew why they started to work with OKRs as part of their transformation. For Peter, it was totally obvious. It was the missing puzzle piece that should bring alignment and focus and put all that together that they were striving towards. But for the people in the teams, it was not. So one of the first things that we established in a workshop with his leadership team was to clearly define the why for the OKRs in his organization at that point in time, and to then also link it to the bigger transformation. For those of you who already use OKRs, could you tell me in one sentence what the why for OKRs is and why you started to use them at that point in time? Could you clearly state which problem you wanted to solve with OKRs, what you were trying to achieve with OKRs over time, and also did you have an honest look around what your starting point was and what your target is to actually measure the success of your OKR implementation afterwards? If not, now might be a good time to revolve that. In Peter's case, they were trying to achieve alignment throughout all the new product teams and also faster learning cycles to be able to adapt to their changing market situation. Another thing that became obvious in the feedback was that they were using the old methods to implement OKR, another common pitfall many organizations fall into. And it's no wonder that people then think nothing has really changed. To avoid that, it is important that from the first step you undertake with OKRs, to use the underlying agile principles of OKRs to implement them itself. What does that mean? For example, to define OKRs for your OKR implementation. That sounds very straightforward. And at the same time, most companies I've ever worked with didn't do that at the beginning. So to clearly set an objective for the next part of your OKR implementation, to find key results that measure the way towards that, and to iterate that also on a 3-monthly basis. And on the other side, to also inspect and adapt the OKR system, so the way that you work with OKRs in your company after every cycle. There is no one-size-fits-all OKR approach for your company, but there might be an approach you started off with because you thought it might make sense. And then with every iteration, with every pilot team you add, you get more and new information about what fits to your company approach, to your current way of leadership, and to the things that you want to achieve with OKRs. Having clearly defined your why for OKRs at the beginning gives you a great playground to then actually make decisions on which variations of the OKR system to use. If you're interested in that, on the OKRs at the Center resource page, you also find a full guide on how to do that. Another thing that became obvious is that many teams were complaining that it takes way too much time to do that. And one reason Peter identified was that the teams were building OKRs as a parallel universe. So as something that would come additionally on top to everything else and create a lot of extra effort, for example, by additional meetings. So one principle when designing valuable OKR journeys is to design the connections of OKRs to your daily business and to your long-term goals, and to integrate the OKR events as good as possible. So let's look at one example, bridging the gap between the OKR implementation and the actual execution. So to make sure that you're not setting OKRs and then the execution takes place at a different universe in your company. One thing to do here is to connect OKRs with initiatives that should actually achieve those goals. Or like this team here experimented with in the IT department, to use your current execution methods, like for example, user stories, and think about how do these user stories contribute to the OKRs that we set? Here, for example, by using categorizations in your Jira system for ticketing. So finding easy ways to connect the OKRs and the execution in everything you do. Or simply to connect an OKR checking with your planning meeting without the need to have an additional OKR meeting that is then again not linked to your daily execution. Now you could ask me, why all the hassle just for this new tool? Why defining goals? Why defining whys? Why looking for all these connections? And that is another thing that Peter found out over time when he worked with OKRs. looking at OKRs just as the new tool that teams should be able to quickly implement has its flaws. Of course, the idea behind, as we said at the beginning, is rather simple. But once you go beyond just working with them in some pilot teams or in designated areas, and you add the whole organization, unit, or department to it, you have the necessity to align horizontally and vertically throughout your entire organization. And by that, adding a whole other level of complexity to what you're trying to achieve here with OKRs. At the same time, we said before that OKRs bridge the gap between the long-term goals and the execution. But this connection doesn't exist in your organization in kind of a vacuum, but they are actually closely connected to the way that you lead your teams and that people take over responsibility, to the way that values and norms shape your company and your culture, to the structures and processes like that you have in place, to the way that collaboration and tools work in your company, how you treat compensation and benefits, and whether or not it is linked to goal setting and achievement, or for example, how learning and development work in your teams. And all of these so-called organizational elements don't exist for themselves as well, but they are connected, they are interdependent, and they have a huge impact on each other. So when you start doing something different in one of the elements, it will impact the others as well. So what is important here? To see OKRs as an essential part of the organizational system and not just a little tool that you're going to introduce to your teams. And then OKRs can actually serve as a catalyst. Because as I said at the beginning, goals live at the center of everything you do. And that is because they sum up everything that you're currently trying to achieve in your company, the next step towards your visions, and everything that you want to change also in your transformations. And by using that, you can then spread that impact to the other organizational elements as well. So seeing this whole picture is a good starting point. Reflecting beyond the actual OKR process, for example, in the OKR reflections, is another. So in Peter's case, when he was looking at the full picture and the feedback that it takes way too much time, he thought, well, the integrations in the teams I talked to actually worked fine. And they also had enough knowledge and experience. So where was the problem? When he looked further, he found out that the old silos still in place, even in the new product structure, were making it really hard for teams to align, and therefore, of course, taking OKRs alignment in a way lengthy process. He also found that they were missing a lot of communication between the hierarchy levels, and by that transpiration of where they are in the OKR process, what they need to integrate as foundation, what the next steps are. And they found that people were having a really hard time taking over responsibility for objectives and key results, given their prior experience, what it means to achieve or not achieve goals and the consequences of it. So reflecting on all the underlying issues is key when you want to move your OKR process to the next level, but also to develop your organization with it. But reflecting on these issues is nothing without acting on these underlying issues. So just looking at them will not solve anything. OKRs are a great mirror because it serves kind of as a magnifying glass for the status quo of the organization in all these areas. But the next important step you need to undertake is to actually then do something about the underlying issues, to then also be able to develop your OKR approach further. And just to name one example, what we established in some of Peter's teams here was a common language and a common concept around responsibility that I can highly recommend. The responsibility process by Christopher Avery. So giving them a common wording around where you are in the responsibility process and how you can actually together achieve a state where you make clear, empowered choices and create the solutions and the results that you want to achieve in a team. And that was one of the things that they did to actually resolve the underlying issues. So where does that leave Peter? In terms of the alignment, they made great progress over time when working with the OKRs and addressing some of the underlying issues. Faster learning cycles kind of got its self-fulfillment through working with OKRs over time. And he identified three main drivers to make that actually successful. One was that they would actually define their next steps for the transformation also as OKRs and use that as a guiding star and as orientation for the teams. Second, that using OKRs actually served as kind of piloting iterative ways of working in the whole company, and by that making it easier then to, in the next steps, also introduce more agile ways of working in the other organizational elements. And they are still until today using OKRs as a catalyst for the underlying issues to be able to see and then address what is still hindering the transformation from full success. If you want to know a little more about companies like Peter's and different OKRs journeys, check out the OKRs at the Center book that Martin just mentioned in the Sense and Respond Press. And if you're already on your OKR journey, then I'm happy to see you at one of our meetups or in our book clubs and trainings if you want to learn more. And don't forget, the idea behind OKR is really simple. Implementing and mastering that approach to actually develop your organization towards business agility is not. But if you see OKRs for what it is, an essential piece of your organizational system that can serve as a catalyst, if you define the why, if you drive the connections, if you go into communications with your team and then act on the underlying issues that they show you, then it might lead you a long way towards your transformation. Thank you very much.